You should have music. Great to see you, Jason, and you, Trish.
Hi, Charles.
Do believe. Okay, now everyone should be able to hear me. Charles, how are you?
I'm good, Jason. Nice to see you.
I think let me just see that thing in your pocket for a second, please. I'm so sorry. Trish, how are you there in Boston?
Good. Just sort of trying to catch up on all the news. There seems to be a whole lot going on, even though it's the weekend.
Yes. So this is Sunday with Charles, and we're here with our friend Charles Ortel. We've got a lot to talk about this morning. Charles, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Clinton business model and what's going on in places like Malawi?
Sure. Today what we're going to talk about is a case study example of how the Clinton brand is used ostensibly for charity. But what I see through the numbers and the filings is really it's a way for corrupt African leaders, corrupt leaders of developing countries to tap into international aid flows. And because in this country and in the UK and other rich countries, there are a lot of well-meaning people with spare cash who are quite interested in finding ways to help the destitute around the world, because a good story will attract a waterfall of money. Bill Clinton and his cronies have figured out ways to tap into that waterfall, direct it towards a country that should have help, but ideally pick a country like Malawi where there's no infrastructure, there's no law, there's no way to check what really happened to all this money. And you then are able to harness this vast flow, divert as much of it as you want, and split the spoils out of public view, all the while pretending to the world that you're doing good work. So we're going to focus today on a country that really is among the most destitute on earth, where a lot of aid money has been sent, and where it all seems to have mostly disappeared.
Now, the other interesting thing, Charles, is you'd sent me a chart that compares the discrepancies between New York City, where of course we are right now, and Malawi. So I just put together this little animation that takes us on a little journey. Of course, the United States has been industrialized since
early 1800s is when it started.
Right. And we're going to bring up some comparisons later to take a look at various factors comparing the United States to the United Kingdom to Malawi. And, if anyone were to go to Google Earth and just look even at the photography, there's virtually nothing that we can see there in Malawi from satellite imagery, because although there are cities, of course, the discrepancies between these countries are just enormous. And it's interesting to note how the Clinton Foundation and the Clintons and all of these, very wealthy foundations seem to really pick these countries that are so destitute, that are so lawless. It's kind of disgraceful.
Yeah, it's almost, if it weren't sad, it would be funny. But when you go and you look at charity after charity after charity, you look at the annual reports, typically the glossy marketing brochures that these charities all put together, there's a simple formula. You slap a picture of a crying African child or a crying brown child with flies buzzing around his or her eyes on the cover, and grandmothers and grandfathers around the world will reach into their pockets and send $19.99 a month to the charity, and nobody really asks any questions, and you feel like you're helping out, when in fact you're not really helping out, because what you're doing is you're enabling what I believe is a corrupt form of globalism. You're enabling almost a cult instead of truly solving the problems that afflict the desperately poor in the majority of the planet today.
Right. And it's, we've got image after image over here of these types of charity events where it's, famous rich people hanging out with the Clintons. There was an article that you had sent in the New York Times that was talking about $500,000 paid to Bill Clinton. Where was that article?
The Happy Hearts thing.
The Happy Hearts, yes. Let me bring that up while you continue.
Sure. So the formula, here in New York City, when I would go to these things, now almost 20 years ago, I used to say to people, I'll give you X if I have to go, and I'll give you a multiple of X if I don't have to go to these benefits, because they're all the same thing. They're these big parties where the cost of attendance is typically per person is far larger than the annual income per person of the afflicted country. And it's an excuse to get together in a big party setting in a gala, eat a meal that nobody really truly cares about, listen to some long-winded speeches, and the accounting for these charities, for these galas, is never really, doesn't seem to be, in the most part, strictly gone through. So this up on the screen now, there was a story in the New York Times about a gala that occurred in June of 2014, and pictured on the screen, of course, Bill needs no introduction, but the lady on the right is Petra Nemcova, who I believe was from the Czech Republic, and she was out in either Indonesia or somewhere out in Asia during the tsunami that's hit really hard late in 2004, early in 2005. This is a ceremony commemorating in New York at a very expensive restaurant called Cipriani, this effort by Petra Nemcova to help people afflicted by the tsunami. And the Times bore into this in a story right as Hillary was gearing up to run in earnest. The Times did actually some decent investigative work, but didn't take it all the way home, looking at how much money was raised for this gala and how much money actually went to the tax-exempt purposes of the charity, and how much money was basically diverted to the Clinton Foundation in 2014. This is something that really should horrify everybody. I mean, if you've got a small charity, and the Happy Hearts Fund is a very small charity, a small charity has no business sending a large amount of money concentrated into the Clinton Foundation without checking, first of all, what was the status of the Clinton Foundation's filing in 2014. And as we'll go through in another broadcast, by 2014, the Clinton Foundation known public filings were in a horrendous shape. Clearly, the Happy Hearts Fund did no due diligence. Otherwise, they would have never agreed to put $500,000 of hard, won money routed into the Clinton Foundation in 2014. It makes no sense.
What's interesting, Charles, is that this Happy Hearts Fund has come up previously in reporting that George was doing about Dr. Eric Braverman, and there was apparently, we've seen this foundation before in previous reports. We'd have to go back to some of the previous videos to follow up on that, but interesting to see how these things are intertwined and interrelated.
Yeah.
Well, Charles, have you seen too, my experience so far is that a lot of times what's happening, the idea of one foundation giving to another foundation just, first of all, seems absurd on its face. And then second of all, it seems that a lot of these donations, foundation to foundation donations, are really just a method for one donor to circulate money on which they have paid little to no tax back through another foundation to their friends and family and, contracts and things like that.
Yeah, in this case, what's interesting, I think, is that the Happy Hearts thing is a charity. I'll have to check and see whether it's actually a private foundation. I don't think it is. I think it's a public charity. It solicits money from the public.
Okay.
And so does the Clinton Foundation. It's not like the Gates Foundation. primarily a grant-making organization. So you're spot on accurate that, when you see one charity giving money to another charity, there's a huge potential for double dipping in terms of overhead. If each of the charities have large overheads, then not much of the donor's money actually ends up going to the intended purpose that the donor may have had in mind. And it's just a highly questionable approach in my view, as opposed to finding, if you're a big donor with $500,000 to go somewhere, you want to make sure that $500,000 actually goes mostly to the intended primary tax-exempt purpose of the foundation. And looking at the Clinton Foundation in 2014, when this donation was made, what was the tax-exempt purpose of the Clinton Foundation in 2014? Some would tell you that it was to fight HIV/AIDS. I would say it was never authorized for that. Others would say it's to fight climate change. I would say that's not an authorized purpose. Still others would say it was a conclave, the Clinton Global Initiative, or this a whole bunch of other initiatives they talk about. There's no evidence that I've seen yet in the public domain that the Clinton Foundation ever validly changed its authorized purpose from the one originally contemplated in October 23rd, 1997, of serving as a presidential archive and research center based in Little Rock. There's no evidence that they ever amended their Articles of Incorporation, which is the controlling document for a charity, that alters its tax-exempt purpose. There's no evidence that they ever did that lawfully.
Well, it's a good way to have dinner with fancy people.
Well, again,
Well, and
Go ahead, Trish.
I was going to say too, my experience is at those charity events, usually what the big donors and attendees are discussing are, sort of the contracts that they're going to be working on for the charity and, cutting deals. It's just another, business making environment.
Well, and yeah, I mean,
At least from what I've seen.
I have nothing against a nice party, but I really think when it comes to a charity, that Warren Buffett has it exactly right. That the challenge in the charity world today is finding charities that truly deserve donations. There's a gusher of money. It's not as if in the developed world there isn't a massive government superstructure. In the U.S., we spend $6 trillion a year on government.
Wow.
We provide a lot of foreign aid. We try to help the disadvantaged people in this country. The same is true throughout Europe and in much of Northern Asia. So when the time comes to try to help somebody in Malawi, what you should be doing is figuring out what will really move the meter in Malawi. And it's not gathering a bunch of titans together, having dinner in some fancy restaurant.
Right.
Helping the Cipriani family pay their tax bill. I mean, that's not the way to go.
Now, you had sent over some information earlier, Charles, that I put into this chart so we could kind of visualize some of the discrepancies between the United States, the United Kingdom, and a country like Malawi. Do you want to
Sure
take a look at some of that?
I'll try to do this psychedelic thing with you.
Yeah, I got pretty fancy with the chart here.
That's right. This is Hollywood.
Right.
Hollywood meets Manhattan.
Can you read those? We got hospitals per million, and in Malawi it's 11.3 versus 29 in each of the United States and the United Kingdom. And I can make this chart available for everybody to download after the broadcast. We've also got, the number of physicians per million, I believe.
I think it's per 100,000, but it's okay.
I did it per million because it was making it explode off the chart, so I just multiplied it. So you got 0.2 for Malawi versus 28.1 in the United Kingdom and 25.5 in the United States.
Right.
Then we're talking about things like airports and heliports, and of course Malawi let's talk about airports first, whereas the United States has 13,513 airports. The United Kingdom only has 460. Malawi had 32.
Yeah.
So it's quite low. And we have different statistics here on things like roads. Obviously, not so many roads in Malawi. For the 4.3 million in the United States, there's 390,000 in the United Kingdom and something like 690 or something like that in Malawi. Very, very low. And of the roads that are paved, this was curious. The United Kingdom had many more This is the percentage, so I
Right.
think it's just the discrepancy in overall roads. But what did you think was the most interesting?
Well, I think the one that really is fascinating to me is what the percentage of the population that has electricity. That's, I think, this one here.
Right, yes.
The percentage of the population, what, Charles?
That has
I couldn't quite hear
electricity.
you.
So, you know,
Oh, yeah.
when we travel through the faculty lounges at the endowed universities inside the developed world, there's a lot of chatter about equality and inequality and all that. And the simple fact is that when you look around the world, even I would argue if you go to the desert, all sand particles are not equal. You know, the distribution of resources and infrastructure around the world in 2017 is skewed heavily. That countries like the United States and the United Kingdom, which have been trading for centuries and have gotten into global commerce and now are, you know, leading in the technology and service sectors, massive investments have been made inside the United States, inside the United Kingdom. But one of the key differentiating factors is that in these our two countries, you know, 100% of the countries are electrified.
Right.
And you contrast that with Malawi, where there isn't much electricity.
Yeah,
And then
that was shocking.
The second issue, of course, is that in the United States and the United Kingdom, you can get around all sorts of different ways, whether it's, you know, you're rich, you're flying and you're taking a helicopter, or using roads or railways or whatever. In Malawi, the road system relative to the size of the area of the land is just not remotely developed yet, and people haven't flocked into the cities.
And I'll tell you, I spent 2 weeks in Malawi in 2011, and the road traffic, the pedestrian traffic is much heavier than the road traffic. When you're driving in a vehicle, on the shoulders of the roads are just streams of people walking.
Right. Right. So when you're talking about, you know, you're sitting here back at Cipriani restaurant and you're saying, you know, how can we help the people of Malawi? You know, you're tempted when you live in New York or live in London to think that that's the way people live. But in New York and in London, I think the statistic in both of our two countries, over 80% of the population lives in cities, whereas in Malawi it's less than 20%. So, you know, the challenge of, you know, even if you wanted to find those poor people and figure out who are the deserving ones and how best to help them.
They're so spread out.
The logistical nightmare of trying to do that is huge. It's not like you could take some volunteer out of Wellesley College or Yale and, you know, give them a bicycle and say, you know, why don't you go into the jungle and get some pills to some village to somebody who has HIV/AIDS. I mean, you can't do it, even if you wanted to do it.
Well, and you know, Charles, when we were there in 2011, to your point about these funds being diverted, and there was oil would be donated to Malawi because they don't have their own source, and the president at the time was hoarding it for himself. And when we were there the last several days, literally tankers that had come into Malawi bringing fuel and other goods were lined up for miles along the road because they had otherwise, even though there were still some coming in, run out of oil. And so like this was apparently a common occurrence too, where everything would be shut down simply because all these resources were being diverted by a few corrupt individuals.
Right, and so then the other question, of course, in the healthcare field, we'll talk a little bit about the Clinton Foundation, what they're trying to do in theory in health. You know, there is a social infrastructure across Africa and in the developing part of the world that operates outside traditional medicine. We can debate whether that works or doesn't work. Some people think it does actually work in certain ways, but you know, the numbers are telling. If you have 2 doctors per 100,000 people in a country, no roads and no electricity, there's no way you're going to be dealing with the complex medical problems in the bush. You just can't do it. So to put a lot of money behind a delivery system that's, housed in Boston the way the Clinton Foundation's Health Access Initiative, which is an expensive city. You live there, near there, Trish.
Well, we went and checked that out.
That's right.
Those two office buildings.
Yeah, we did that you guys did that last week, and thank you for that.
Yeah.
Instead of having all those expensive people making, in some cases, high 100,000, 200,000 a year with their expenses of travel, their prohibitive travel expenses around the developing world, it'd be much smarter if you really wanted to help to situate this thing in a country that's centrally located in a region, and then to employ people
who are from there,
to encourage talented doctors and nurses to return, and then to get more actively involved in, I would argue, electrification projects and road building projects, as opposed to these charities, which sound good on paper. You say, what are you doing? Well, I'm stopping HIV/AIDS in Malawi. All right, well, who's checking that?
Right.
Who's going in on a regular basis, who isn't jet lagged, who's accustomed to the traditions, who speaks the language, who can get around, who's not going to be fooled, to make sure that, what you're doing is not an elaborate stage set in the middle of Malawi.
One of the most surprising statistics that you included in the chart was the number of hospitals per 100,000, and we can see that here. Let me see if I can zoom in on that a little bit. The number of hospitals...
Hospital beds.
Hospital beds, okay. So that number versus the number of doctors. So it was, I think, 113 hospital beds per 100,000 people in Malawi, 290 in each of the United States and the United Kingdom, which is, all right, that's a lot less. But the number of physicians per 100K in Malawi was 2 versus 255 in the United States and 281 in the United Kingdom. So how could a physician in Malawi even operate under those conditions? It just seems...
The people there, the vast majority of the people there, not only would they have no way to even contact a physician, no electricity or a phone, but then they have no ability to get to a physician. I mean, they're very isolated, the population there.
Yeah.
So here's the hospital.
It wouldn't even matter if all the doctors that they needed were there. The individuals themselves would never be able to reach them to even get help. It would be one thing if you could deliver health services like, nursing calls or things like that they do here, for example, but you can't even do that. So.
Yeah, I agree. And, we should perhaps pause and pay tribute to the much maligned Central Intelligence Agency who puts these statistics together. They're online in something called the CIA World Factbook. And, to those of you who are interested in really getting behind what's going on around the world, this body of statistics is extremely useful. It's updated annually, and it's in great depth. It's done fairly consistently. So, maybe there are individual mistakes in the way they sample and estimate, but
mistakes.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Well, speaking of which, on that point, Charles, I sent to Jason a document that it's shadow government statistics, and these are there's a lot of doubt about the unemployment, inflation, and other indexes that we use because they've been manipulated over the years, and so this source I've found personally is a really great one for understanding the real numbers versus the ones that are necessarily provided by government agencies. So just FYI for you as well as the people watching, this is a great resource that sort of explains how those numbers can be manipulated and what to look out for.
Yeah, this is a great site. I also am familiar with it, and thanks for bringing it up, Trish. It's an excellent site. And people talk about, my own father has a PhD in nuclear physics. That's a hard science. Economics is a very soft science. And,
it is. It's so easily manipulated. It's incredible.
And this is very, very good work, actually, by John Williams at Shadowstats. when we think about starting place, when we think about countries, it's not like there's a bell curve distribution, an even distribution, a symmetrical distribution of results around the world. Wealth is concentrated, consumption is concentrated, investment is concentrated, investment in infrastructure is concentrated. And and Malawi is very different than Haiti, is very different than Papua New Guinea, is very different.
Right.
And people need to understand that when they start reviewing the Clinton Foundation record. A foundation that theoretically is headquartered in Arkansas, in Little Rock, that then has an office in multiple offices here in New York City, some disclosed, some not disclosed, which is against the law, some in Boston, that for a time had its chief legal officer in all places in Chicago. And you don't need to be a genius consultant from Boston Consulting Group or Bain to say this stinks. You don't do that. If you run a foundation, you've got a duty of care, a duty of loyalty, a duty of obedience. What you're supposed to be doing is soliciting lawfully around the world for funds that you then take and hoard and guard carefully, and you spend and devote those funds solely to your authorized tax-exempt purposes. You don't, temporarily use them for something else. You don't decide that, well, running an archive in Little Rock isn't all that sexy. Instead, I want to fight HIV/AIDS, or wow, the Earth is falling apart. Let's fight climate change, or let's do something else. You're not supposed to do that.
It's hard to get supermodels to come to a dinner in Arkansas, but New York City
is
much better. I got a great idea. I want to see if I can figure out a way to make some sort of an interactive counter, so that when we do these shows, every time you list something the Clintons that have done that's illegal, it'll be like bing, and another.
We should do that.
It'll be going off the whole time, though.
Yeah, it will. It would be good.
Charles, I think for a lot of us, the information that you bring forward is so compelling and really, stands on its own face. And for those of us who aren't connected directly to people who are in positions of influence, what can the regular person do in terms of maybe writing their own charities or foundations that they know who've given to the Clinton Foundation, and maybe ask them about it? Or what are writing to the IRS? I don't know. What do you think are ways in which we can mobilize to sort of attack this?
Well, Jerry Corsi has a book out that came out, I want to say, in 2016. You have, I think, the cover of it somewhere there, Jason.
Yeah.
And in the final chapter of his book, what he does is he lays out an answer to your question. And the answer to the question, I think, is that inside the United States, and I know you have domestic and foreign viewers, inside the United States, most charities are regulated, and I think 45 out of the 50 states, and then in Washington, D.C., all of those jurisdictions, I believe, have rules for charities like the Clinton Foundation that seek to raise more than $25,000 typically in one of these jurisdictions. And those rules, when you look at them in the regulations, are super strict. For example, I was looking today at Michigan earlier today, and Michigan currently is run by a Republican Attorney General. He's term limited. So next year there's going to be a very pivotal set of elections in Michigan, because Michigan's one of those states that, I believe went for Trump, or, it's a toss-up or whatever. It's a hotly contested state. So the question I have now for the Attorney General, I think it's spelled Schuette. I won't dare trying to pronounce it for fear of mispronouncing it, but I think his first name is Bill. Bill, what the heck? I mean, we have all the Clinton Foundation forms that have been filed in your state, and they have failed to disclose numerous defects. For example, they have failed to disclose early on that they were disciplined not once, not twice, but 3 times in the state of Mississippi, starting in 2001, for soliciting without registering. And they failed to actually explain to you, Bill, in your state, on the forms they provided, the true extent of those infractions. The second thing they failed to disclose to you, Bill, is that the principal fundraiser, who's listed, I just checked it earlier today in the 2007 Michigan registration form, One of the fundraisers mentioned is a firm now called OMP, I think. And that's a firm that worked with the Clinton Foundation going way back, I want to say the 2000, 2001 timeframe. In 2002, I believe, that firm was disciplined in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for soliciting on behalf of multiple foundations, including the Clinton Foundation, without registering in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And that fact is not disclosed in Michigan. Nor is the fact on the Michigan forms for the Clinton Foundation that I have, is it disclosed how the Clinton Foundation changed its tax-exempt purposes, or alleged that it had changed its tax-exempt purposes.
Ding, ding.
Right, ding, 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 ding. Again, I checked in Michigan. The law is it's only a misdemeanor, punishable by I think up to $5,000 or $10,000 per count, and up to 6 months in prison for each.
But no sensible prosecutor that doesn't want to take a dirt nap would
Right.
find
Right.
it.
Right. But in this case, so what does Michigan care about when you read the law? And this law was, I think, promulgated or enacted in 1975. So it's not as if they just came up with this idea. The basic principle in charity solicitation is that when you go inside a state like Michigan as an Arkansas headquartered charity, you have to tell the good Attorney General of Michigan, this is my record. These are the people who work in our charity. We either have never had a problem before, or if we've had multiple problems, you have to be truthful and honest and explain what those problems were, what happened, how you remedy the situation. And they haven't done that properly. And then, in terms of changing the purpose, the Clinton Foundation record, we talked about Joe Conison's book last time. It's an excellent book, and it recites in great detail how, beginning in early 2002, Ira Magaziner and Bill Clinton, who then were not named officers of the Clinton Foundation, migrated the purpose of the Clinton Foundation from, yet another library for a former president, this time in Arkansas, into, hey, we're going to fight HIV/AIDS around the world. And they started soliciting by their own admission in 2002 for that purpose. They raised hundreds of millions of dollars of pledges. That money does not show up in the Clinton Foundation's filings, and they've made multiple filings in the state of Michigan that still have not been corrected, and they're still soliciting in the state of Michigan. And, Bill, what are you doing, Mr. Attorney General? I mean, so the answer to your question is you have to go state by state by state. Now, I understand why Eric Schneiderman, who has a beef with Trump, a long-standing feud with Trump, I understand why he would tilt the scale and for a much smaller set of infractions go hell-bent for leather against Trump University and get the $20-odd million settlement that he got out of it. I get that. But
Why?
Really
because
good point.
it's
Really
we
good
live in Malawi on the Hudson. I mean, we have here in New York State, we have a corrupt system of Democrats will not investigate Democrats. Same is true in California. So even though this is an Arkansas-based charity, the main Clinton Foundation, in every state in which it operates that has registration and reporting requirements concerning solicitations, in every state, that's out there, the attorneys general should be up in arms. And in states like Michigan and like California and like New York that have high income tax rates, allowing a charity to operate this way costs these states tax revenues, which which should be recouped. And this guy out in California, Xavier Becerra, he has national political ambitions. He's the new attorney general. The previous attorney general, of course, is Kamala Harris, who, on the strength of 7 months in the Senate or 8 months in the Senate, some are saying she should be the next president of the United States.
A presidential candidate,
right?
yeah.
But come on, guys. This is simple. What are we doing to protect the public at large, the grandmothers and grandfathers who, see the pictures of the Malawi kids on these brochures? What are we doing to protect those donors who maybe they're willingly gullible, maybe they just love the Clintons and, they view this as a way of greasing the Clinton, overhead base, and they don't really care too much about it. But in some cases, I would guess some of these people are trying to get favors out of the Clintons. Right, and they would love to see the Clintons back in power. But the short answer, long answer to a short question, is people listening to this need to go and in their states, particularly if they have any connection to the regulatory apparatus in states, in particular in high tax states, where tax revenues are disappearing, do your own work. Check to see whether you think I'm right or wrong. Go on my website, www.charlesortel.com. Read the reports. Maybe I've made a mistake, but I can tell you, I started on this project in February of 2015, and not once has the Clinton Foundation come out with any credible rebuttal of any aspect of this analysis. Not once, and time has passed.
Have they acknowledged it at all, Charles?
Well, if I were they, I wouldn't. I mean, they're global celebrities, and I'm just one dude. So you wouldn't want to.
You're becoming a global celebrity.
No. Hope not.
Well, Charles, so someone was mentioning in the comments that in order to bring a complaint that you need evidence, and my understanding is that on your website you have outlined, a lot of this information. Are there resources available on your either social media or website that people could turn to in moving forward with an attempt to sort of investigate this in their state?
Absolutely. I mean, actually, this is the reason I started on this. When I first got in the business of exposing complex frauds in 2007, I started with General Electric, which is a private company. I mean, it's a publicly traded company, but it's a corporation. And so the filings and the laws that apply to exposing fraud in a corporation are very different than a charity. They're much tougher for a corporation. So for a charity, like the Clinton Foundation, that is what's called a public charity, it solicits continually. While we're on this broadcast, it's soliciting, digitally and otherwise. The laws are, the reason you have to register is you have to inform the public the true state of the conditions in a charity. And so there are multiple forms out there that are in the public domain that are absolutely wrong. And anybody has, or any citizen has an absolute right to go look and actually to demand of the Clinton Foundation, produce proof that you are a validly authorized charity in my state. You can do that, and federally, any citizen, even if you're in, if you're in New York, you can say, listen, I want to know, is this thing, show me the proof that this thing is validly authorized as a charity to fight HIV/AIDS. When did that authorization occur? Because they did a lot of work.
You're talking about state by state, like going to your state attorney general's office and ask, or which office?
So it depends state by state. In some states, you have the Consumer Affairs, Consumer Protection Department. In other states, it's the Secretary of State. In other states, it's the Attorney General. But I pick on Michigan, California, and New York because those are states that are richer, that have a longer tradition of doing this kind of stuff. So the laws are better developed. The reports are pretty good. And New York and California are excellent. I mean, you can look at New York law and California law where taxes are stratospherically high, and therefore deductions, the value of deductions is high.
Right.
The laws in both New York and California require foundations like the Clinton Foundation to list out, not in bulk, but in specific terms, each donation from a government entity or agency, domestic and international.
Right, which we know they didn't do.
They've never done it.
Ding.
Yeah, exactly. There we go.
I got to figure out how to make that work. Really get a counter going there. So Charles, there were a bunch of other links. Sorry, Trish, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I just so for people to have something really succinct. So they should find the authority in their state that oversees the authorization for public charities, and then ask that agency for proof of that authorization was given.
Well, the specific question I would ask in a state is go into the state and regulator and say, listen, this foundation claims in its IRS form that it began fighting HIV/AIDS in 2002. Show me the evidence in your state that this foundation has asserted it was authorized by the IRS to fight HIV/AIDS internationally in 2002. Show me that documentary evidence. They won't be able to do it because they never did it, never got it.
Right, but this will increase the pressure certainly, and if you have thousands of people out there asking the question, then that becomes newsworthy in and of itself, and hopefully, we can make some progress that way.
Another thing to consider doing, recently, and I know in some circles it's controversial, Joe Arpaio was pardoned by Donald Trump. Another approach is on Twitter, just to start sending to Donald Trump, why is John Koskinen still head of the IRS? Yeah. What is going on here? I mean, John Koskinen last year so irritated members of Congress that he was nearly, censured or impeached.
Well, how did he do that? Irritate them?
Well, because John Koskinen and the IRS has a department, oversees charities, called the Tax Exempt Organizations Department, and it is thought by some, particularly on the right, that that organization under Barack Obama, starting in around 2010, persecuted right-leaning Tea Party conservative groups. And Lois Lerner, ultimately in 2013, was revealed as somebody who may have been acting inappropriately on top of that division. She was forced to resign. She then came into Congress to testify and protested her innocence and then pled the fifth, something lawyers will tell you you cannot do. You either plead the fifth and shut up, or you testify. You can't do both. Anyway, so there's a big story, I think, in the IRS side of life. We should turn the heat up. People in the heartland, your crowdsourcers looking for truth, should be tweeting out to Trump, tweeting out to their representatives, tweeting out to their senators, why is John Koskinen, an Obama holdover, still head of the IRS? Why is there an acting head of the tax exempt division in the IRS even now? Why hasn't Donald Trump, changed? These are political appointments. He could change that overnight. What's going on?
Well, Margot on Periscope is asking, she thinks he just got subpoenaed. Do you know anything about that?
John Koskinen got subpoenaed?
I believe that's who she's talking about. Margot, were you talking about John Koskinen? Or maybe that was someone else. I'm sorry. It's difficult for me to track all the comments there. But that's interesting, and it's good to get the interactivity. You had sent over some additional links, Charles. Did you want to take a look at some of those?
Sure, yeah, let's do that.
Meanwhile, Charles, Niami Deha in the comments says that you are actually an international sensation. So there are five people abroad watching right now. So.
That's great. Well,
Thank you.
Plus we've got our friends on the VK social media network in Russia, so it could be even more.
All right,
which would you like to look at?
Is that just us or somebody else?
This is a really great site. Okay, I'm one to criticize government, but this is a fantastic site maintained by the New York State Attorney General's office. Now, the IRS. The forms that are available for federal forms are not necessarily as complete as you'll find in this site. So we'll do a little experiment, Jason. I don't know if you can punch in an EIN. Do you see the EIN box?
Yes.
So we punch in 31, and then the 158-0204.
Whose EIN might that be?
That might be the Clinton Foundation.
I'm amazed you have it memorized, but also not. Do I need to? Okay.
Hit search.
Yeah.
So what this site has, this has stuff that you don't get out of the IRS as readily. Now watch it fail. Watch it. No, here we go. So then you punch Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea Clinton Foundation.
Into here?
Right here.
Oh, yeah. It's going a little slow because I got a lot of...
Yeah, it's okay. But this, people can do this at their leisure. So we scroll down the site, okay, and I'll pull up just one thing here. Just stop here for a sec. Here you have, make it a little small. So bylaws, organizational rules, don't do it now, but if you were to click on that one, you will get the document that shows how the Clintons illegally, bing, 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 converted this charity from being supposedly a public charity, broadly supported by the public, to one that's controlled only by the Clinton family. You'll see that there. If you punch certificate of incorporation, we can look at that for a second. That's a controlling document that lawyers will tell you. That tells you what a charity can and cannot do. Okay? So I don't know if this will be the original. This is not really the certificate of incorporation. This is just...
Charlie Daniels, did you go down to Georgia?
He did everything.
The fiddle to Maine of Gold to play the devil?
All this says is that somebody got a copy of the certificate, and this just shows, this is, I would argue, this is false and misleading. This just shows the amendment. It doesn't show the original certificate of incorporation. So if you want to change the purpose of a tax-exempt entity, if you go back up a little bit, you have to amend it, right? At the time they amended this says April 25th, 2005, they changed the name, they claim, from the William J. Clinton presidential foundation. Now, what do we think a presidential foundation might do? Could it be a foundation that's supposed to operate a presidential archive consistent with the statute dealing with archives? I think it might be. So here, this just shows they changed the name on April 25th, 2005. Because you changed the name doesn't mean that you've changed the purpose. To change the purpose of a foundation, you have to lay that, well, you have to lay out what's the new purpose. You can't change the purpose of a tax-exempt corporation by fussing around with the bylaws, which are sort of like, the Articles of Incorporation is the controlling legal document. The bylaws have to do primarily with how directors interact with one another.
Internal stuff.
It's internal stuff. This is the face of what the public knows about a foundation. And so that document in New York, I would argue, is misleading the way it was filed. But there's no evidence in New York that we see that the Clinton Foundation has validly changed its purpose beyond being a presidential archive. So we can go back.
Yeah. I think people are catching on to the ding, ding, ding. We're going to have to definitely get that going for the next episode.
Right. So let's go, if we can get the one for 2007, which is...
This one.
Yeah. This one.
This?
Yeah. So this is hysterical. This one. All right. And by the way, this is a free resource. Thank you, State of New York. But we look down here. This was on December 17th, 2008. Andrew Kessel, the beleaguered, I would argue, chief financial officer, and a lower level person who should not have signed as president, Stephanie Street, signed this document under penalties of perjury. Let me read this out. We certify under penalties of perjury that we reviewed this report, including all attachments, and to the best of our knowledge and belief, they are true, correct, and complete in accordance with the laws of the State of New York applicable to this report. What is one problem with this thing? I will, lead the... Yeah, ding, ding, ding. This form, the final deadline for filing this form was November 15th, 2008, if November 15th was a weekday. If it wasn't, it would have been, the next day after, whatever the 15th. Right. All right, so this is filled in late. So, it's non-compliant, this form. This is, if you remember our history of Barack Obama won, I think, on around the 4th or so of 2008, and then Hillary and Bill signed this memorandum, or they signed a memorandum of understanding regulating the behavior of the Clinton Foundation and the presidential transition team. That document was dated as of December 12th, 2008. And here we see this form was filed 5 days after the MOU was signed, okay? Not in compliance with law, putting the Clinton Foundation, frankly, in jeopardy under New York state law. So if you keep going down, keep going to the next page. All right. This is that firm I told you about, O'Brien, McConnell, and Pearson, which had the problem in Pennsylvania and has never, in the Clinton Foundation filings.
It's a law firm?
This is a fundraising firm. Okay. It's involved both in charity fundraising and also campaign fundraising for various campaigns, including, I think, Hillary's campaign. We keep on going down the page to the next page, if we can.
Yep, sorry, lost my mouse there.
We need a mouse hunter. Okay. Okay, this is a classic. The MOU, which we don't have in front of you, is dated, I'll just tell you, you don't need it. It says that the Clinton Foundation has, since 2002, been raising money from multiple governments, and it lists them all out, different governments. This is the form for 2007, where you're supposed to say all the government grants that the Clinton Foundation received. And they say it's not applicable. Laws don't apply to us. We're the Clintons. We don't have to tell you what.
Right.
And you'll also see when we get, so we keep on going down the page. This is the New York form. It's a diabolical mess, basically, total fraud. And we then get, this is the exhibits, the IRS form and the audited financial statement. So we keep on going. First page here, you see the revenue, expenses, and changes in net assets or fund balances. Do you see this line here? 1C. Indirect public support. And then 1D, government contributions. Jason, what number do they declare for government contributions on their IRS form in 2007?
Looks like nothing.
Right. And actually, when you read the instructions for these forms, you're not allowed to fill them out this way. Each line has to be filled out.
Ding.
So they don't even fill out, they don't declare their government contributions in 2007.
So how does any of this fly? How are they?
Because they're the Clintons.
What would happen if I did that on my taxes?
I'd visit you.
Yeah. But wouldn't you get in trouble?
You get in massive
fined?
trouble. I mean, it's just amazing. So we can keep on going down. I want to. It's quite a few pages down, and there's something very, very funny. It's going to be like 50 pages later. So if you could, I don't know if you got one of those things on the right-hand side that you can.
I'd have to open it in Acrobat to do that.
All right.
Might be difficult to get there. This is page 79.
If you got to like page 50.
51?
Yeah, I'll try that. Keep going now. All right, this is a classic. December 15th, 2008. Let's look at this letter carefully. A nonprofit service group based in Virginia. We look at this guy, George E. Miller, Esquire. He's not a member of the bar.
Wow.
No, he's sorry, Missouri bar only, right? And, and Carolyn A. Emig is not a member of the bar, but she's a lawyer. All right.
How can that be?
Nor is Virginia L. Smith, not a member of the bar. So George Miller writes this letter. Now, with the Clintons, you always have to be careful. The letter is dated December 15th, 2008. And I will tell you that the audit for the Clinton Foundation, in quotes, was issued on December 12th, 2008. Let's go down a little bit further. Look at this. Please find transmitted herewith all documents required to be filed with the state of New York, except for the audited financial statements for fiscal year ended 12/31/2007. The auditors have been delayed in completing the audit. The audit was issued 3 days earlier, on December 12th. We'll see it in a second.
So what are they getting at?
They're trying to hide the audit, and I'll show you why they're trying to hide it. Then they send it January 14th. They send the audit.
This is the audit for 2008, Charles?
For seven.
Seven, okay.
Okay, now this is while Hillary is going through the process of being confirmed before the Senate.
Secretary of State.
If the truth were known about the Clinton Foundation at that time frame, she would not have been confirmed. So we keep on going a little bit further, and here is the audit. Now, first of all, I want to just point out this is not an audit. This is a report, and it's not a report on the consolidated financial statements of the company, which is required. You just see that right away?
Yeah, it says independent accountant's report.
It's non-compliant. That's not, we need to tougher thing. It has to be fully.
Wow.
And we keep on going. And here we see, remember I told you that date, December 12th?
Yeah.
Now, before we get there, the combining statement of financial position, combining statement of activities, this information we will show you momentarily is purposefully omitted from the Clinton Foundation version of this same information. They hide it on their website, and I'll explain why they hide it. But we go down to this page. Jason, what date do you see in the lower left corner when you get to it?
December 12th.
That's the date when it was issued. So why was George Miller sending a letter using the post office? You know, ding, ding, ding. Why was he sending a letter using the mail across from Virginia up to wherever he was sending it in New York, so across state lines? Why was he sending a letter containing a materially inaccurate fact to a government authority? Was he obstructing?
Because he loves committing federal crimes?
Could be. Could be. So we keep on going. And here's the balance sheet position, you know, of the Clinton Foundation in theory, but it's not, doesn't say statements of consolidated financial position. This is a loosey-goosey, who knows what's really in the Clinton Foundation preparation, non-compliant with applicable law. So we keep on going to the very end, actually.
The last page of the document?
Yeah. Second to last page.
I think we might be.
All right. This shows that document was received sometime January 19th or so, right? If we go back to it. Next page up. All right. And unfortunately, I don't know if you can tilt this, but okay, look at you. Rotate clockwise. All right, perfect. So what this shows you, this is the income statement broken down by entity. Okay? So the foundation excludes climate, it includes Clinton Health Access Initiative, it includes the Hunter Development Initiative, and it includes the thing in Canada. Look how small these things are.
What do you mean?
In 2007, the Clinton-Justra Sustainable Growth Initiative is $100,000 in revenue.
And now it's like $1 billion.
Well, no, I mean, the point is, the press releases on that one would make you think it's gigantic.
100,000 is not that much at all.
Yeah, and the the Clinton Hunter Development Initiative, CHI, this is the Clinton Health, the HIV/AIDS Initiative, and climate. None of these four entities, for none of these four entities was the main Clinton Foundation ever validly authorized by the IRS to control the activities of climate, Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative, Hunter, or Juicer. None of them were approved. And then we look, this line here is grants. Contributions and grants, that's the third-party money that comes in.
Right.
You see that the foundation got $15,000 in grants. Contributions are likely small donations. Grants are the bigger donations, right? We look over to CHI. CHI got $43.7 million.
Wow. Where is that coming from?
I'll tell you where it's coming from. But let's look to the right. What's the total amount, Jason, of grants?
130.
No, grants. 43,761,032.
Oh, right.
Right? So all but $15,000 went to CHI.
Right.
So one question you might want to ask yourself if you're a regulator is, was CHI validly authorized and legally operating in Massachusetts, its headquarters state, during 2007? And the answer to the question would be that you can see in Massachusetts, on March 31st, 2008, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts involuntarily revoked the authority of CHI to operate in Massachusetts, meaning that for the entire period from March 31st, 2008, right the way through to the filing of this report, this is a gross fraud.
Two questions, Charles. Would you say that it's a key aspect of the modus operandi to make these illegal entities so benevolent in their conception, like their AIDS foundations and all these types of things, so that anyone questioning them is seen as a demon kind of, they don't want you even going near it. And then Andrea in the comments is asking, what is Hunter's initiative?
So Hunter's initiative, that's a great one. So Sir Tom Hunter, and I guess we can actually jump to, but before we leave this page, I will answer the question. You saw how we did it. If you replay it, you can go in and you can get any report you want off of Jason's links here. And look for yourselves. See what I'm talking about for yourselves. Compare this version of the filing to what's on the Clinton Foundation version of the filing. And you'll see they purposely trying to hide this because it's so indicting. If we go to, this is the Hunter Foundation, and if we go to who we are, you'll see the big cheeses who are involved. So it's a family. This is a Scottish charity, and it's one of the biggest ones in Scotland. But you see, they have this concept. They talk about venture philanthropy.
Wait a minute, didn't they have all the trustees listed?
Yeah, the Hunter Foundation is a proactive venture philanthropy. There is no such thing, right? You can be a philanthropy, and you can dedicate your assets into venture capital in support of your tax exempt. In Scotland and in England, they're called objects. Who we are is what you want. Yeah, here we go. So Tom Hunter is a gentleman who did extraordinarily well. He's from Scotland. He started with nothing. In his blog, it talks about how his teachers basically said, you better think about doing something else as opposed to getting a job.
Maybe stealing
but
money
he a lot of times it happens that people like that are very, very good in business, and he's one of those people who was very successful, and he was able to sell his business for a lot of money, and he got involved with charity. Now, he hooked up with one of the lead outside directors, is this very famous guy. If you can go down a little bit, you'll see his name is Vartan Gregorian. And Vartan Gregorian is a distinguished individual. He's an American success story. Horatio Alger came, I think he's Armenian, and he came to this country, and he was a gifted student, and ultimately became president of the New York Public Library, president of Brown University, president of the Carnegie Corporation. He's a trustee of a number of different things. And I bring all this up to say, A, he's smart, B, he has experience, C, if you look the Carnegie Corporation up in New York, you will see an example of how to properly fill out a form where you do list out all your government contributions.
Right.
So this gentleman, if he put his time and attention into what was really going on at the Hunter development effort with the Clinton Foundation, there's no way he would say, oh yeah, this is fine, right? Because under US law and under UK law, you can't have an ad hoc group. Trish can't get together with Jason and Charles and we light up a campfire, get some marshmallows, and say that we're helping people in Malawi. If you want to do this, you've got to actually figure out what the law is in Malawi.
Making s'mores for undernourished
Right, in the
children.
bush, right? Lighting up the bush with s'mores. Right? You actually have to make sure that both entities, the Hunter thing and the Clinton thing, are each authorized to actually do these tax-exempt purposes, whatever it is they're doing together in Malawi. You have to, if a corporation is required to be formed in Malawi, you got to make sure that you do that properly. You've got to keep good books and records. And what you also have to do is disclose any private activities that may be happening around your philanthropic activities. And if we pull up that Sid Blumenthal email, this is an interesting thing.
That was the WikiLeaks
Right.
one, right? Where is that? Here it
Right
is.
there. So
He writes some really interesting emails, that guy.
Yeah, so this is Sid Blumenthal writing on the 21st of February 2012. He says it's regarding a Rwanda concern. Now, the Hunter and Clinton development initiatives do happen in Malawi and Tanzania and Rwanda, and we'll do another one on those countries. We just wanted to focus on Malawi for now. But this email and others that are in the chain that you can see show that people were very concerned about what the Hunters were doing. You see this company Soyco and another company Rwanda Coffee. Not only were they attempting possibly to profit, you raise your profile in these countries, you go and you get some sweetheart deals to invest. There are also questions about the labor practices of these companies, whether they were
Taking advantage of the people.
exploiting labor. So, when you get involved, the message here is that when you do international charity work under U.S. law, the rules are actually very strict in the U.S. You have to control your operations internationally tightly from a U.S. base, which obviously the Clinton Foundation has not done. If you get involved with the Hunter Foundation in doing something, there has to be an agreement. You can't just say, yeah, we're going to do something together. You have to actually have a legal agreement. There's no legal agreement I've seen yet in the Clinton Foundation filings that explains exactly what the Clinton Foundation is doing with the Hunter Foundation. And I've been involved in 50-50 joint ventures. They, excuse my language, this is a highly technical Harvard Business School term. They suck. You take a 50-50 joint venture, the other person always assumes that you're in charge or they're in charge. It doesn't get tightly managed properly. And is this a 50-50 deal? Who was in charge of it? Did the Hunter people contract to the Clinton people to get the job done? Where's the paperwork on all this?
Who's in charge? I wanted to call this show Charles in Charge.
No.
Chachi got pissed off. So listen, Trish has got to run right now, so we're going to say bye-bye for now, Trish.
All right.
And
Bye.
if you want to stick around for a few more minutes,
Sure.
there's some questions in the comments
Thanks,
section
Trish.
here. See you soon, Trish.
Thanks,
Take care.
Charles. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye. So just real briefly, Charles, people are curious to know, first of all, you're friends with Peter Schweitzer, right?
I know Peter Schweitzer, yeah.
Were you involved in the Clinton Cash book or movie at all?
I was not involved in the book, but I went to the screening in New York of the movie before it was exposed, and there was a small group of people
The premiere.
it wasn't really even a public premiere. It was just sort of an internal
Private screening,
yeah. And I did provide advice to Peter and to Steve Bannon about how I thought the thing should be promoted. The original theory, from recollection, was they were going to try to go the traditional approach in many screens. And I said, listen, the distribution people, and I'm no expert on media, but I imagine the distribution people are going to squash this thing like
Absolutely.
a bug. So rather than going the traditional route, I recommended that they just make it available on YouTube or however, and that's what they did.
I think that was a very good idea because, I do have some experience of trying to get independently produced films distributed in Hollywood, and as you've indicated, it's very difficult, particularly with unpopular subjects like the Clintons breaking the law. We also have a comment here that wants to know how much of the Clinton Foundation money is held in offshore accounts, and if you know where that would be. Would that be something that the Panama Papers was talking about?
Well, so the way this works is, the first way in which you would answer that or check to find out what was going on is you'd have actual audits. And an audit is that, those of us in business have been through audits. by accounting firms, you actually, a tough audit, you have to reveal to the auditor every single account that you have anywhere in any bank, anywhere in the world. And then the accountants then add all that stuff up and they say, all right, how much cash did you have at the beginning of the year? How much cash do you have at the end of the year? Now let's track the movement of all the cash. But if you have a schlock auditor, and I'll go on the record and say BKD sure appears to be a schlock auditor I'd never use, at least the Little Rock people, because that seemed to be, that office was the office that I thought, in quotes, oversaw the Clinton Foundation.
Right.
The auditors would be the first people who should know. Now, the second people who should know are the Department of the Treasury. It's changed over time, but even prior to September 11th, there's a very strict regime on the books that's enforced rigorously, that if you're an individual or a corporate entity and you have a bank account with more than $10,000 in it, you had, I'm simplifying, but that's a rough line, you have to report all of those accounts, and you have to report gory details, like who has signing authority, what's the name of the account, what's the high balance, what's the low balance, what's the average balance, you know, every single account. You can't just say Chase Manhattan. You've got every single account anywhere in the world. You have to file these forms. They have to be in by June 30th if you're a calendar year filer, following the end of your calendar year. And my strong suspicion is the Clinton Foundation has not done this right. One reason I would say that is we know that tiny entity, CGSGI, is a Canadian entity that began in operation in 2007. And nowhere in the Clinton Foundation early filings, 2007 forward, do they mention that they had a Canadian bank account, which of course they must have had. And in the Justra filings for that foundation in Canada, it claims that that entity entered into an agency agreement wherein the Clinton Foundation, I believe in New York, ran that joint venture. So they certainly should have disclosed that, and I don't believe they have.
Well, but of course, no sensible auditor would go anywhere near this. You know, I don't know if you've seen our confidential crowdsource contributor who's codenamed King James, but he's very knowledgeable of a lot of the Clintons' activities in Canada, so I'll be interested to see what he has to say about that. People want to know about Qatar. It's rumored that $2 billion were transferred to Qatar from the Clinton Foundation, and the Maldives keeps coming up as well in the comments here.
Right, so the one thing that we do know about Qatar, and I will freely admit and proudly admit that I was asked to be one of the co-founders of the Stop Qatar Now movement, you know, back a number of years ago. Qatar is a country that we could quibble with Donald Trump's foreign policy in many places, but with regard to Qatar, that is a country that is run by a despicable group, and you know, it has been routing money. Elements in that country have been routing money around the world to all sorts of causes that are inimical to the interests of the United States. In the filings of the Clinton Foundation, minor donations are disclosed, both from Qatar into the Katrina, the Bush-Clinton Katrina Fund in starting in around 2005 and thereafter, minor money. Also, the Clinton-Bush Haiti Fund. Again, there's more disclosure in the Clinton Foundation 990s in, I think it's Schedule O, which talks about other activities. There's a lot of verbiage about what they were doing down in Haiti with Qatar. There have been stories in the press that maybe large amounts of money were routed through the Clinton Foundation back and forth to Qatar. The Maldives story, there was a story, and you know, I'm not sure what publication had it, that maybe some money was routed into the Maldives in the name of the Clintons. But that's typically stuff that's extremely tough to check.
Right, right. And just to run through a couple more of the links that you had sent over, what was the deal here with the president of Malawi, the Joyce Banda Foundation?
All right, so it's an old tale, actually, and it goes back to the, you know, in English lore, it goes back to the English history, it goes back to the you know, the Crusader period and before, when, you know, the warrior kings and the nobles getting close to the ends of their lives, you know, they wanted to make their peace with God, they would get involved making substantial donations to charity and form charities. Back then it was, you know, abbeys and convents and things like the churches. And that's so this is an old practice. Just, I would argue, as the Clintons have done, maybe as Gates has done, you know, you lead your life one way and then you say, you know what, I need to cover myself in glory, so I'm going to create a foundation. And so then if I create a foundation, I can call myself a philanthropist.
Right.
Now, Joyce Banda was the president of Malawi, I believe, for 2 or 3 years. And she, I think, holds the honor of being the second, this is now the dishonor, but she holds the honor of being the second female leader of an African country, I think.
Wow.
But recently in the news, I think this is an African blog, she is now being hunted down for possibly being involved with as much as $250 million. This is recent, July 31st this year. A Malawian court has granted the police a warrant of arrest in respect of the country's former president, Joyce Banda.
That's crazy.
Right. And when you go into the Hillary Clinton Secretary of State WikiLeaks emails, I think we have a link to that as well. I don't know if you have that one, Jason. That's on my production note thing. But there's a whole bunch of emails back and forth when she was Secretary of State, wondering what was going on with Joyce Banda, or Banda, however you pronounce her name, with Hillary Clinton inquiring about, what was going on there. This could be it. No,
sorry.
It's all right. Well, it's okay.
Here it is.
Yeah, in this one. This is a Sid Blumenthal email.
He's really busy emailing Hillary, huh?
Now, just to refresh everyone's recollection, Sid Blumenthal, some credit with that New Yorker magazine cover that pictured during 2008 in the primary season, pictured Barack Obama and
African outfit.
Michelle Obama. No, in the Oval Office, dressed as terrorists.
Oh.
So Sid Blumenthal did that during the campaign, and one does not need to be much of a genius to see why the Obamas would say Sid Blumenthal is not welcome on the property. But nonetheless, here he is emailing Hillary, and this is the famous Arnaud de Borchgrave.
Also worth mentioning, he's the principal at Osprey Global and was involved in Timber Sycamore and all those operations to overthrow Libya and Syria.
Right. So here's what was going on in Libya. Is that it is alleged, and this is a long email that trashes Muammar Gaddafi, probably justifiably, but this is an email February 25th, 2012, so before September 11th, 2012, with all the events in Benghazi, explaining that what Gaddafi would do at these different African summits is he would hand out bags of cash, Gucci bags filled with, here we explain, I had a bag in the hold. Well, anyway, you'll go in here, you could read it at your leisure, but there's a treasure trove of emails talking in here about the degree of corruption in Africa, and some mention the Banda name in it.
Interesting. Well, Charles, it's a rich topic, of course, and every week you've got more and more incredible evidence. I mean, when will something happen?
Well, I'm hoping that and thanks to the field agents, the line agents in the FBI and the different, hopefully in the Department of Justice, maybe there's an attorney general out there. We have 50. Maybe one of them will decide to do and protect the American people.
Maybe they're watching right now.
Let's hope. But the line agents in the FBI, they have. All the work I'm doing is external, public information only. They have the ability to get in and get answers to the types of questions they can find those Treasury forms to see what the Clinton Foundation declared starting in 2001 about their foreign bank accounts, year by year by year. What detail? I can't get that. They can.
Right.
Who knows what else they can get with subpoenas and interviewing witnesses, etc.
Now, one of our commenters is saying Soros is a Nazi. I think that's inaccurate. He actually just worked for the Nazis.
Yeah, so George Soros figures in all this. He's a prolific donor and, of course, a very rich investor. But in a little-known fact, two wings of the Soros Foundation, the so-called Soros Foundation in New York, in 2004, and the Open Society Institute, which is controlled by the Soroses, in 2005, each contributed money to something called the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative in 2004 and 5, which legally didn't exist. So
How can
if,
they contribute money to it if it doesn't exist?
well, I mean, you can route, I mean, if no one's serious about regulating a charity, the federal and state tax people lose because George Soros is able to take it, you know, or his foundations are able to take deductions they shouldn't really be getting.
But I mean, how do they have a bank account and stuff if it doesn't exist? It's a little difficult to kind of wrap your brain around.
It's possible to do things like that.
Wow. I guess if you're very tricky,
Yeah, I mean, if you
figure out how to do it.
Yeah, I mean, the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative was based in Arkansas. So one imagines it's possible the Clintons might have some ties in Arkansas.
Yeah.
And they might be able to convince, you know, somebody who wants to make sure that money comes into Arkansas to look the other way when the application, you know, to get the bank account goes in. You know, under a theory that cash is going to Arkansas. So
Right.
we won't. Bill Clinton said it's okay.
Must be okay.
It's okay.
Yeah. Well, listen, Charles, I really appreciate the time. We could talk endlessly about
right.
this, but we'll save some of it for next week. And thank you for coming over to share all this info. I think everybody in the Crowdsource community really enjoys hearing you talk about this stuff. We've got comments saying they could listen to you all day. But of course, we'll wrap it up right here and
Thank you,
enjoy your
Jason.
Sunday, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.